The year is 1971. A young man named John Francis is walking down the coast of San Francisco when he witnesses two Standard Oil tankers run into each other and spill 800,000 gallons of oil into the San Francisco Bay. This traumatized him so badly that he made a vow never again to ride in a motorized vehicle for as long as he lived. Now, obviously, his friends thought he was crazy. Like, what's one person not riding in a car going to do for the environment? And he argued with them, he debated with them, and it got to the point where he was sick of arguing with people every day because he wouldn't even let them drive him places. He walked everywhere he went. And so he got to the point where he was so sick of arguing. On his birthday, one year, he said, you know what, that's it. I'm not going to say a word for this entire day. And so he did it. He didn't say a word the whole day, and he really liked it. So the next day, he made the same vow again. He said, I'm not going to say a word for this day. And then that day turned into a week, and that week turned into a month, and that month turned into a year, until John Francis did not speak a single word for 17 years of his adult life. That's crazy. I can't be quiet for 17 seconds. So during that time, what did he do? He started a nonprofit environmental awareness organization called Planet Walk. And why did he call it Planet Walk? Because he walked everywhere he went. He walked across the country from San Francisco to New York and back again. He received a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD, all without speaking a word. And since then, that was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, since then he started talking again and driving in cars. He's written books. He's done a TED Talk, which I watched. And in one of those books, he said, I soon discovered that hidden at the edge of silence was healing, not only for the angry mind, but also for the spirit. So this got me thinking, what is so powerful about silence and solitude that this man who was silent for 17 years says that it healed his mind, but also his spirit? He was also alone most of this time, walking. No one really wanted to walk across the country with him, believe it or not. And so I was thinking, what does this mean for my own life? Because it's very rare that I, and I'm sure like most of you, are silent and alone. It's very rare. I mean, every time I want to be alone, I swear every time I want to be alone, my parents have another kid. I don't even know. Stories like these encouraged me to study silence and solitude deeper and to discover what practicing these disciplines made people better people, wiser, heal their mind and spirit, and also more effective leaders. Because this John Francis, he was a leader. I realized that they were important disciplines. And I also noticed, like I said, how few of us are actually silent and alone on a daily basis. C.S. Lewis noticed this half a century ago. He said, we live, in fact, in a world starved for solitude, silence, and private, and therefore starved for meditation and true friendship. This led me to research how specifically silence and solitude benefited people, and then how these can make people more effective leaders at their workplace, in politics, or in the military, or just on a daily basis. So first, allow me to define my terms. What is silence? Contrary to popular belief, silence does not necessarily mean the absence of all noise. Brett McKay, the author of the largest independent online men's interest magazine, Art of Manliness, defines silence as the absence of human-created stimuli. What does that mean? Well, that is anything that forces you to have a response. That can be a conversation with someone else, a casual conversation. They're talking to you, that's stimulating a response from you. That can be watching TV, or reading a book, because that's you, not you thinking, that's you thinking whatever they want you to think, or reading what they want you to read. And it's not playing on your smartphone, that's for sure. That's the biggest disruptor of silence in the modern era. The smartphone, just this constant deluge of information, data, noise. A physician named Charles Eastman defines silence as the absolute poise and balance of body, mind, and spirit. But what's most important to understand about silence is that you must consciously choose to attain silence. It doesn't happen on accident. You have to consciously make an effort to silence your mind, to focus, to block out distractions. And this can happen whether you're on a mountaintop somewhere all by yourself, or if you're in the middle of a rock concert. Anywhere it can happen, it's just all in the mind. So similarly, solitude. What is solitude? Again, most people think it's being alone. It's off on your health. There's no one else around you. This does not necessarily have to be the case. Common perception is that solitude is loneliness. It's negative. But as Richard J. Foster, the author of Celebration of Discipline, says, where loneliness is an inner emptiness, solitude is an inner fulfillment. And actually, solitude is the cure for loneliness. Again, just like silence, it is a conscious choice to be in solitude, and it is more a state of mind and heart than it is a place. So again, consciously choose that. So from these definitions, you can see how closely related they are and how almost indistinguishable their definitions are. And so in my presentation, I will probably use those words interchangeably, silence and solitude. I have 3 main points. Disclaimer. My presentation is about the benefits of seeking out temporary times of silence and solitude. Humans are made to live in community with each other, don't get me wrong. Man is a political animal. We are meant to live in communion. We are meant to go to church together. We are meant to socialize. Please don't hear me as saying that you should all go become hermits, all right? Or monks. These benefits don't necessarily qualify for people who actually suffer from loneliness, depression, and or social withdrawal. Just as there is danger in the lack of solitude, there is also much danger in prolonged solitude, away from other people. I'm simply making the case that we need more of a balance in our daily lives, more silence and solitude than we currently have. So I have 3 main points. Silence and solitude improve the health of your mind. It is good for the well-being of your soul and your spiritual life, and these effects can enhance one's leadership capabilities. Health of mind. A study done in 2003 by Long and Averill called Solitude, Exploration of the Benefits of Being Alone, found that the freedom made possible by solitude often creates a greater capacity for creativity in the person experiencing it. This was reinforced by other studies that said that kids that spent time alone or were able to spend time alone were able to hone artistic abilities more. They learned how to paint, they learned how to play an instrument, they wrote poetry. So that really helped them become more creative individuals and create beautiful things. An example of this from history, Vincent van Gogh. He was in art school. Some of you might have heard of him. He got kicked out of art school because he was unorthodox, he didn't listen to the teacher, he didn't do what he was told. And so he got kicked out, suspended, and so he said fine. He went and lived on his own out in the field in his own studio, and it was there that he studied from books and paintings of old masters, and he learned how to paint. And during those nights, being alone in a field looking up at the night sky, he was able to create stuff like this. Next, self-analysis. An article from the Annals of the New York Academy of Science talks about this default network that the brain has and says it is a specific anatomically defined brain system preferentially active when individuals are not focused on the external environment. So this is the state of mind that happens when you zone out, when you space out, when you're sitting outside looking at the clouds and your mind starts to wander. This is really healthy for your mind, for your spirit, because it helps you figure out solutions to problems. Leads to creativity, like I said, and also leads to self-analyzation, like looking inward. Analytical clarity. Businessmen, politicians, and military personnel, most of them, the leaders, withdraw into seclusion prior to making a big decision to ponder solutions to problems. And being alone and by yourself really helps you sort through what's this, what's that, and make a clear decision. Secondly, is silence and solitude really help your spiritual walk. As Christians, being quiet, be still and know that I'm God. That's what the psalmist says. First of all, it helps you guarding your tongue. I know I have not guarded my tongue sometimes, pretty regularly, I'm sure. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says, there's a time to keep silence and a time to speak. So it helps us in that way. It keeps us from sinning if we just take time to think before we speak. Second, there's this thing called the dark night of the soul, and that has nothing to do with Batman. It is defined by a Spanish friar named St. John of the Cross. It's a spiritual surgery. When you're quiet and alone, God, that's like the anesthesia, and then God draws you in, and then he works an inner transformation on your soul. It's like a spiritual surgery, catharsis. It might feel rough during that time. You might feel like your faith is dry, but that's God working an inner transformation that will make you a better person afterwards. And then lastly, and most importantly, Christ was alone a lot. Christ understood this, and Christ, Jesus, was fully God and fully man, and he desperately needed this time alone to himself to spend with God, so how much more do we need that? Before he began his ministry, he went out into the desert and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. There he overcame temptation. After his cousin John the Baptist died, he took time to himself to grieve. And then after miracles, like feeding the 5,000, he would retreat into the mountainside to pray and talk to God. Obviously, before the crucifixion, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane and prayed to God there. The point is that God reveals himself to people in their quietness. Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote most of the New Testament in prison by himself. John was in exile on an island when God showed him the vision that became the book of Revelation. So again, very important to be alone and quiet for God to reveal things to you. And so all these benefits I've shared so far really help to improve leadership. For instance, creativity helps you find new ways to problem solve. When you're trying to make decisions for the team, it can see a new avenue, a new way of doing things. Self-analysis leads to authentic leadership. When you look inward, you can really be honest with yourself, and when you're honest with yourself, people want to follow you. Analytical clarity, it gives you the foresight and the clarity to think ahead. Well, what happens if I choose path A? What happens if I choose path B and path C? Dwight D. Eisenhower very much loved being alone when he was a general in the Army. He said he made sure that analysis had always been carefully and accurately made before sending out his troops. And he actually said, an orderly, logical mind is absolutely essential to success. So this analytical clarity, like Eisenhower was saying, is very important to a leader's success and just success in general. Secondly, on this, emotional strength. The leader must have emotional strength, right? It is important for a leader to reflect instead of react. And General James Mattis, the current Secretary of Defense for the United States, said an effective leader is the person that can maintain their balance and reflect when a lot of people around them are reacting. I think we can all agree that lots of people react much more than they reflect. The single biggest problem today in leadership in senior positions is the lack of reflection. This is echoed by Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, If, which says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Moral courage. This is the most important part of my presentation. A leader has to be morally brave. How does silence and solitude help them do that? Well, James Gates Percival wrote in the 19th century, 1 hour of thoughtful solitude may nerve the heart for days of conflict, girding up its armor to meet the insidious foe. We all face difficult scenarios in life. In business, we face a difficult scenario. What's the moral? What's the ethical decision here? In relationships, what should I do? What's the right way to go? How should I act? How should I respond to this person when they do something bad to me or when I do something bad to them? And so we all need to take time alone to retreat, to think in our minds, what are my morals? What do I stand on? Who am I aligned with? And then plan out, what if this scenario happens, what that scenario happens? And once you're firm in your own morals, then the decision will be made clear which way to go when those scenarios arrive, and you'll be an efficient leader because you'll know what to do when no one else knows what to do. Take Joshua, for instance. Joshua, in the Bible, book of Joshua, he said, choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua had already decided who he stood with. He was standing with God. And that was so important because he was the leader of the Israelites. He already knew what decisions he would make, and that made people want to follow him. Dwight D. Eisenhower, again, said, subordinates can advise, urge, help, even pray, but only one man in his mind and his own heart can decide, do we or do we not? A leader can have many people under him, many teammates that encourage him. What do we do here? What do we do here? All of the other Patriots can tell Tom Brady what they think he should do. But at the end of the day, it is the leader's choice, the leader's call to decide what to do. And they need to be ready for that. We all need to be ready for that. So what does this mean for you? You might think it's impossible to find just a second of time alone in our busy lives with work, social life, sports, all this stuff. Alone time is very rare. This is when silence and solitude is most crucial to culture and society. We need creative people to make beautiful things that elevate the soul towards God, to look towards God and heavenly things. We need self-analyzation to create philosophers, to educate people about human nature. A clear mind to help solve political problems. The end, listen carefully, the end of all attempts to be silent and meditate is drawing closer to God. The end of all attempts to be silent and meditate is drawing closer to God. So how can you, in your busy life, make silence and solitude a part of that? A really effective way would be to take a week or a weekend and go off by yourself away from society and go hiking, go camping, go visit somewhere, stay in a monastery, and just totally reorient yourself. Obviously, for most of us, this is not likely practical at all. We all have responsibilities and stuff to do. So as Richard Foster, who I talked about earlier, and who wrote Celebration of Discipline, he recommends a quarterly retreat. So 4 times a year, take 3 to 4 hours on a particular day, and either stay late at the office, or send your family out to go get something to eat and stay home. You go out, you go for a drive, and just take that time to reorient your life, reaffirm your goals, your long-term goals, your short-term goals, and just really figure out what's going on, pray, meditate. And this is really useful. I think most of us are able to do this. It's just 4 times a year, 3 to 4 hours, really can change your life. But the most practical effects, and remember what I said earlier, that silence and solitude is not necessarily an external arbitrary condition. It does not necessarily have to be quiet outside it. It doesn't have to be no sound waves, and you don't have to be away from other people. We can have silence and solitude in our daily lives, all of us. First thing, and most importantly, is to get rid of sources of input. Your phone, the TV, books, kids even. Maybe even take a social media fast or an electronics fast for a week. Just get it out. And then, as the Bible says, have a prayer closet. Have somewhere to go and be able to sit and be alone just for a couple minutes, either in the morning or at the end of the day. Wake up early, stay up late. Use your shower. I mean, we all shower, hopefully. And that time is very valuable. You're alone, you can think. It's got running water, white noise to block everything else out. That's a very valuable time to take that silence and solitude. Drive to work or your daily commute to work, school, whatever. Use that time. Turn off the radio, turn off that podcast, and just take time to pray, meditate, reorient your goals. Also, maybe you have a workout routine that you normally listen to music during. Turn the music off sometimes, or go out for a jog in silence, enjoy nature, enjoy the beauty. All these things are very important to our lives. Silence, we all need silence and solitude. And so to reaffirm that, I would just like to take these last 10 seconds to just have a moment of silence. Thank you. I will now take questions from the panel first.
So, Nate, my first question is, which has more of an impact on creativity, an imaginary friend or solitude?
Oh.
Scratch that. Real first question, in your paper you talk about a default network. Can you speak to a little bit more what that is, how it's achieved, and what are the benefits?
I can. That was actually one of the most interesting parts I found, because it's this actual physical, anatomical mode that your brain goes in, kind of like a default factory settings, if you will. It's what we're right now busy thinking. Like right now I'm thinking about what I'm answering your question. I'm thinking about the presentation, talking to people, or thinking about a movie. But the default network is what your brain goes into naturally when you're quiet, when you're by yourself, when you're outside, say. And this really helps to purify. It's a purification thing. Helps you think clearly. And so, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Mr. Good.
I was actually going to ask a similar question, but so here as well with Mr. Lancaster's. Are there any kind of medical imaging studies that have been done that show different brain chemistry that happens or different improved brain function over that's both immediate effect and also long term for people who have a practice of doing this and have long term benefits later in life in terms of brain function. Maybe don't suffer from Alzheimer's or other types of dementia later on.
Yeah, I did look at that. I didn't find a whole lot of concrete scientific results, but I was definitely interested in that too. What I found was more of it's more psychological. It's more just psychological, mental, but nothing that was super concrete as far as like chemicals in the brain or anything medical. That's awesome.
Did you find that during your study, did you find that people of faith practice this more often than those of not faith?
Yeah, actually, it was interesting. It seemed like everyone was pretty much the same. People of faith and people not of the faith. I think we all fall into the trap of being busy, not taking time alone. I think especially Christians that know better, we know that we should be still and know that God is God. I think we know that we need to find that closet, that room to go and pray in silently and alone. But I don't think a lot of us do it as much as we should. And so I think it was pretty even across the board with people that didn't necessarily know that they're supposed to and the people that have faith in God and know that they're supposed to. Mr. Irvin?
Yes, I tried to remain silent during your speech, so please forgive my coughing.
No.
First and foremost, I want to say that having read your paper and served as a thesis reader on your panel with Ms. Sinkovitz serving as a thesis chair, I thought your topic was extremely fascinating, very interesting, but very difficult. Very difficult to do. The sources that you looked at were extremely hard to mine, and I just want to commend you on that. I think you did a fantastic job. One of the things I wanted to ask was, your thesis statement says, quote, the spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude are beneficial both to the human faculties and to the soul, and are necessary for effective leadership. But my question is this. Did you at all encounter the opposite to this or any of this in your research? So in other words, did you find any counter-evidence or studies that indicated that actions such as non-silence or music or even white noise, and I know you've addressed this a little bit within your definitions here, or just the din of a city, can those actually have more of a positive effect, or being in the presence of others, being actually more spiritual for the person or more spiritual for the soul? So, in other words, I think of Job, and Job was with his friends for quite a while and didn't say a word. What do you think about that?
So your question is there any evidence of the negative effects of not having silence and solitude? And then also, is there benefit to having white noise or being quiet around friends?
Yes.
Okay, so the first part, I did find negative research. There was a study done in the late 90s that discovered that adolescents that could not tolerate being alone often failed to develop their creative talents. If they always like to party, they always like to do stuff, they often fail to stand out in music and art and writing, etc. And then also for the the white noise, or being around friends. Yes, I did find that. Just trying to look at where I wrote that. There was a speech given by William Deresiewicz. I butchered that name, but I had it in my paper. I didn't bring it up here, but he talked about how sometimes being with friends, close, intimate friends, and having close, intimate conversation with them, sometimes, contrary to what you might think, that is the best way to have silence and solitude. And you might think it's weird because, well, isn't he stimulating a response for me? But this is more of an intimate response. It's like you asking your inward thoughts to a physical person and letting them respond. So it's a method of externally battling inwardly, if that makes sense. So I mean, we probably all done this, gone to a close friend and said, hey, what do you think of this, man? Like, do you think this would be a good idea? And he bounces it back, and it keeps you honest with yourself. So yeah, I think close intimate friendship is really a great method of attaining silence and solitude.
Thank you.
This is it.
So, the last couple of years since I've had you for a student, we have read a number of books that have had main characters who have done silence and solitude all the wrong way,
Yes.
with really horrible results, like Raskolnikov and Frankenstein and The Unman and Gatsby even. So how does one avoid becoming a tyrant in his inner self, or getting caught up in hubris? Because one of the problems with hubris is that you think that the rules don't apply to you, which is easier to convince yourself of when you're not around other people. So ought there to be some sort of accountability for people who practice this on a regular basis?
Yeah. I think, like I said, my disclaimer, and I stressed at the beginning, it's definitely a discipline. So it's not easy, right? It's a conscious effort to be silent. But then also my disclaimer, there has to be a balance. We have to live with each other. We have to socialize with each other. We can't spend all our time alone, because there's a lot of danger in that, as we saw in all those characters. King Lear jumps to mind. I don't know if that's real. But yeah, but those characters definitely suffer from being away from society too long and not having that balance. So it's the imbalance that I'm warning against, because too often in modern day 21st century America, we tip the balance towards no silence and solitude instead of too much. And I think there's danger both ways.
Thank you.
Just awesome.
In your paper, you had talked about Jesus, and kind of you briefly talked about him up here too, in regards to how he practiced this often. And I think you stressed a point in your paper as into if Jesus was out there doing it, how more important it is for us to do it ourselves as human beings.
Right.
And so maybe if you can elaborate a little bit on that point, I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah, it just struck me because I never really noticed it before, but like obviously Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is fully God, fully man, but yet he still needed that time, and he craved that time to be alone by himself, to spend time with his Father in heaven, our Father in heaven, the God. And that just he showed us examples of when he was grieving, he took time alone to himself. Before making a decision, before choosing his disciples, he went and decided to think on his own. There's a story, Mary and Martha, the story of Mary and Martha. We see the contrast between Martha, who was busy all the time, not sitting down, just listening to Jesus, whereas Mary sat down, took time, and listened to Jesus. Like, that's also what we should do. And Jesus probably taught her that. Jesus, before his crucifixion, obviously that is a big deal. And he showed that to God. He brought that all to God. I think it's really convicting to me, because if Jesus needed it, he was fully God, knows everyone, knows everything, is all powerful. If he needed that, so also do we very much need that. Any other questions from the panel?
So obviously in preparation for this, have you had the opportunity to practice this and take solitude, and if so, what are reflections that you found?
Yeah, so actually before coming here tonight, right after school, I went in the shower and I drove myself, also here. But then I also did some research. There's a monastery down the road. I looked to see if I could get in for like a day or two to just spend time alone. And I'm under 18, so they won't let me do it alone. But yeah, but I definitely want to. And I know there's places where you can rent a little like tent, a little like house out in the woods where you can go spend. It's probably like an Airbnb or something. But yeah, I definitely want to once I'm legally allowed to. Sure.
Some of my questions. An additional one I had, and this is, in a world full of constant noise with TV, iPhones, video games, what do you seriously and personally see for the future? Do you think more people are apt in this milieu that we currently live in and most likely will live in the future do you think more people are likely to see the sound of silence and solitude, or no? And I know it's, many people can be pessimists or optimistic, but I just am curious as to your opinion based on, your current lifestyle, the world that you live in, and the experience right now, and the research you've done.
Yeah, personally, I don't see people going that way. I think you can hear it from Mark Zuckerberg, you can hear it from all people. Everyone's trying to make it, communication and networking instantaneous. You need to be connected with everyone at once, all the time. And I think that that's where technology is moving, that's where society is moving, to just be able to be with everyone and always have this noise, always have this conversation going. So I don't necessarily see that, and that's why I thought this topic was so important, because I think we need to reintroduce that and make a conscious effort as Christians to do so.
Thank you.
So Tammy,